Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking even more about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time getting reborn for Nintendo Switch 2. I've been on the record for saying this multiple times, but I believe this is going to be the most ambitious reworking we've ever seen from Nintendo, and I don't really think there's that much room for debate here. From what we've seen already, I think it's quite clear Nintendo is doing a great deal with this game. But does that mean substantial changes beyond just visual? I think there are going to be some changes, but there's a lot of debate to be had in terms of how significant these changes may be. And we've theorized about so many crazy cool changes, a lot of which make sense, others might be more of a pipe dream. But point is, there is a lot of potential here, there's a lot of things that do make sense. Of course, we do not know exactly what Nintendo is doing. However, we can tell that they are doing something substantial here, and there are some things that I feel are pretty much guaranteed to be changing. And that's what I want to dive into today, clearing up on what exactly I think, with great confidence, is going to be seeing some substantial changes this time around. But before diving into it, let me take this moment to ask that if you find yourselves enjoying my videos, and if you haven't subscribed already, to please subscribe. Now I will be getting into the guaranteed changes here, but first I would like to talk about some things that aren't guaranteed, but I do believe make a great deal of sense. Enhanced combat. Ocarina of Time came out in 1998. Sure, they remastered the game for the 3DS in 2011, but there were hardly any changes there from a combat perspective, and that was such a long time ago. If they are going to be putting out a modern version for Ocarina of Time, I do think it makes a lot of sense to modernize the combat. If they don't modernize the combat here, I do believe that with this release, people will be able to feel the age with the combat here. So I do hope that they will and think they'll at least do a little bit, but it's not guaranteed. Something else that isn't guaranteed is substantial new content. There's been a lot of theories about this. I do think it makes sense to at least add a light temple, like an actual dungeon to earn the light medallion. And I also believe it does make a lot of sense to revamp the dungeons that are already in the game, modernize them, add a little bit more to them, and redo the boss fights so they're more significant and more ambitious with a few more challenges. And I also think the overworld deserves more side quests and things of that nature. I think they should expand on things a bit. I also recently put out a video theorizing that perhaps Nintendo could be using the Ocarina of Time remake as a bit of a testing ground for the next new open-air Zelda, somewhat like how Nintendo used Wind Waker HD to test things out on the Wii U in preparation for Breath of the Wild. There could be something similar going on here, perhaps to a greater degree, and that could even translate into some interesting new gameplay ideas that we see used with the Ocarina of Time remake. What if they go deeper into the time travel mechanics and it's more heavily integrated into the puzzles throughout the world and the dungeons? It would be amazing to see things like this, and I do think there's evidence to back up some of these ideas, but none of it is guaranteed. What is guaranteed though? Well, firstly, the designs. Obviously, we've already seen this game is getting significant visual enhancements here. It's being remade from the ground up, and it's being made to look like a modern game with modern hardware. That much we already understand, but from the brief teaser trailer, we can already tell there are going to be significant redesigns. The Deku Tree himself, as we've talked about before, has a lot more to his design. His canopy is far more thicker and dense. He has a far more fuller beard, a lot more vines and such and branches. There's a lot more to this design we've seen just on the tapestry, and this is just one example. We look at young Link, and we get a look at his 3D model, and he also looks substantially different. His green tunic is not just one layer of clothes now, there are layers to it, there are leaves covering him with an intricate design, and then we even see his hat that has a little bit of accessories added onto it as well, things we have never seen before in Link's design regardless of what iteration, not with the main green tunic design. And we've also recently gotten an update about this game regarding the rating, the ESRB rating, and what we've learned is that this game in this version no longer has suggestive themes. Now, suggestive themes, there is certainly room for interpretation there, but many people, myself included, seem to think this could be tied to how Nintendo's handling the Great Fairy. You see, back in the original version, a game that came out for the Nintendo 64 in 1998, where there were serious, significant visual limitations, the way the Great Fairy is portrayed, it was basically a woman fully naked just with some vines covering them up, and because of the visual simplicity of the time, they could get away with it in terms of having a more family-friendly rating. But in today's day and age, a game made in 4K with high texture detail, they would not be able to get away with the same exact design. And so it's been thought that the Great Fairies would be seeing a significant redesign here, and what we've seen from the recent ESRB rating update seems to be supportive of that. Now, if we look at how the Great Fairies look in Hyrule Warriors, I think that's something that would still be highly representative of the overall vision of what the Great Fairies were meant to look like back in 1998, and I still think they would look great, but also they would be more fitting of an E10 plus ESRB rating. Main point being though, it's guaranteed we are going to be seeing substantial redesigns here, and I do think it's going to go beyond just the characters, but the world itself. We're going to see things in a far more detailed fashion. There are going to be changes and adjustments. Perhaps they will even make some changes that will be reflective of modern Zelda, like perhaps at least portraying the Hebra region off into the distance. We could see some snowy mountains. I'm not saying they would allow us to explore it. That's not guaranteed. And it's not even necessarily guaranteed that they would be adding this detail, but thinking along these lines, putting in that extra level of detail, even in the 3DS version, there are more details added to the walls, the buildings, and things of that nature. So there's going to be a lot more going on in terms of the designs overall with this remake. That much is guaranteed. Something else that's guaranteed though are quality of life updates. Ocarina of Time saw some significant quality of life updates with the 3DS version. With that second screen, there is far greater accessibility to the items and also the songs. But this time around, there is not a second screen. Yet the spirit of those changes should still be made. One of the biggest issues with the Water Temple is how often you have to go back and forth between the start screen and the actual gameplay, swapping your iron boots on and off. It takes away from the immersion. And we've seen with modern Zelda how they would solve problems like this. With Skyward Sword, you have a readily accessible item wheel. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you are able to summon up multiple lines that you can just scroll through of different items to use on the fly without going directly to the start screen. These kinds of changes we've seen in modern Zelda will very likely be implemented for Ocarina of Time as well, so they can still maintain that spirit of readily accessible items that they accomplished with that second screen for 3DS. Another quality of life change though that's essentially guaranteed is free camera movement. In Majora's Mask 3D, by the time that game came out, there was the new Nintendo 3DS which had a second analog stick, a little C-stick nub, which allowed for free camera control as we've seen from more modern 3D Zeldas. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, these games had a camera that you could control freely with the control stick 360 degrees. This is something that can easily be added to the Ocarina of Time remake, especially with the substantial changes we're seeing to the visuals and the designs, and we even saw them add this to Skyward Sword HD, so for sure, this will also be in there. And perhaps almost as likely is the game taking advantage of HD Rumble. Rumble is a standard, of course, but the Switch 2 has enhanced Rumble technology. We've seen various games take advantage of it. This being Nintendo's most ambitious game of the year, it would be quite surprising if this one didn't also take advantage of it, especially because this game is likely going to be treated as a significant system seller. You would want this game to showcase the abilities of the Switch 2, at least some of them. And with that in mind, something else that's also guaranteed are motion controls when it comes to the aiming. We've seen this in modern Zelda, they even added it for Ocarina of Time 3D, so of course they will have it in this reborn version on Switch 2. Mouse controls might be kind of hard to pull off, there is a great deal of aiming, but this is a third-person action adventure, so that kind of style of gameplay may not be most suited to mouse controls. But beyond this feature, everything else about this game should be taking advantage of Switch 2. Another change though, that I believe essentially is guaranteed are story changes here. This is going to be the most significant release of the year. I do not believe this game will be handled as a budget title, yet Nintendo recently released Star Fox for Nintendo Switch 2, which has been treated as a budget title in terms of its actual pricing, and yet with this remake, is that they included many new story cutscenes. What Nintendo did with the Star Fox remake I think should be the bare minimum of expectation when it comes to the Ocarina of Time remake. And so I do think it's very likely that there will be story changes or story additions to the Ocarina of Time remake. It's already pretty much confirmed that there's going to be voice acting because the teaser trailer literally has the narrator voice acting. And what's also interesting, the teaser trailer, this narration, is pretty much covering the beginning of the game, the introduction to the game. But there's one very key difference here. The introduction to the original Ocarina of Time is narrated, by the Deku Tree. This time around, the Deku Tree is referred to in third person. So this is already highly indicative that there are going to be story changes here, story shifts, and that there's going to be voice acting. So what else could be done here? Quite a bit. Let's remind ourselves that there have been many additions to Zelda lore over the generations since Ocarina of Time. One big one would be the story of the goddess, which, by the way, we've seen leaks for a live-action Zelda movie that will be heavily featuring that as well. And so I would say it's very likely that we're going to be seeing indications throughout the world of Ocarina of Time Reborn on Switch 2 of the goddess Hylia. We'll probably see goddess statues very much in the same way we saw them throughout Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. There are probably going to be additional cutscenes that will give us a little bit more characterization on various characters. Perhaps learn a little bit more about Ganondorf's motivations in Ocarina of Time. What's interesting is that we kind of already know what those motivations are because we learned about them in the Wind Waker. They could actually expand on that a bit more or showcase us those motivations in Ocarina of Time. The king, Princess Zelda's father, is an off-screen character, but still an important character to the story of Ocarina of Time. Perhaps they could even include scenes that show this person. There's been a lot of indication that the owl, Kapora Gabora, is a proxy for the Sage of Light, Rauru. Perhaps there can be more clearer indications or simply more characterization of Rauru and Kapora Gabora with these new cutscenes. Perhaps we could get a little bit more about the history of Hyrule, the war that took place beforehand, what happened to Link's parents. Or us learning a little bit more about the sages, making them to appear as more relevant characters. Something that I think is important to keep in mind here. Ocarina of Time came out in 1998, where standards were a lot lower across the board, not just visually, but gameplay-wise, story-wise. And so with a modernization for Ocarina of Time, they're going to want to modernize it across the board so it stands the test of time. Ocarina of Time in its current form, the version that came out for Nintendo 64, or even the remastered version that came out for Nintendo 3DS, do not stand the test of time. They need to make changes to make sure, at the very least, the game holds up relatively well now. And so I think it's quite clear that significant visual redesigns, significant quality of life updates, and at least a bit of new story elements are guaranteed for the Ocarina of Time remake. Everything else, we'll see. But there's a lot of potential here. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.